Today, I have the honor of speaking to you about social media and how it is used by governments. In this case, I will primarily discuss how the US Embassy in Tokyo uses our social media to connect with audiences in Japan. First, I will briefly discuss recent data about global and social media use and compare it to the available data about social media use in Japan. Next, I will speak generally about how and why governments use social media. This will be followed by an overview of the United States objectives and priorities in Japan, which sets the tone for how the US Embassy uses social media here. Then I will give a macro level view of social media in the State Department by discussing some of the department's flagship accounts. And then I will move to the embassy and consulate accounts in Japan. Later, I will give an overview of the ABC model, one of the many strategic frameworks we use to curate content for our audiences. Finally, we'll take a look at some content examples that the embassy has produced. Then I will wrap up my presentation and move into the question and answer portion of today's masterclass. I'm truly looking forward to discussing this topic with you all. And I'm happy to have Yuki today to help me with my slides. I am ready whenever you are, Yuki. Awesome. First slide, please. So here we have a couple of statistics about internet and social media use in general, and then I can tell you a little bit more about social media use in Japan. So as you can see in the bottom right, the world's most used social media platforms have Facebook ranking at the top, and then some more like question and answer type websites at the bottom. Interestingly enough, Japan is the only country that we know of where Twitter is more popular than Facebook. Instagram will likely eclipse Facebook as well, given that most of the users of Instagram are on the younger side and our Facebook users tend to be a little bit older. A few more social media statistics about Japan. About 93.8 million social media users are in Japan as of January 2021. That's roughly equivalent to 74.3% of Japan's total population. This figure represents a nearly 5% increase in social media users over the past year. Worldwide, about 61% of the world's population uses the internet. And in terms of putting that into a larger context, about 94% of users in Japan are on the internet. The United States is about 92%. And on the higher end, we have Denmark and the United Arab Emirates with 99% of their populations using the internet. So Japan ranks quite high. Next slide, please. So today's big question is how and why do governments use social media? Just to start, our team here at the embassy likes to use the term digital media. And the team that I head is called our digital media team. This is because SNS, or social media, is not the only way that governments communicate with our target audiences online. Some other examples include our official government websites, virtual events like the one we're participating in today, and webinars. And as you all know, these types of events have increased in popularity, especially over the past year. With regards to social media, the specific SNS used in a particular country may differ depending on availability and audience. In Japan, we primarily use Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Why do governments use social media? Well, first, it's to engage and reach wider audiences, which often include people who would be left out in what we'd call traditional diplomacy or government to government diplomacy. We also do this to achieve our goals and objectives in a particular country or region, and this would be done in tandem with our typical diplomacy efforts. Next slide, please. So what are the United States objectives in Japan? Our first is to strengthen the US-Japan alliance. Our relationship with Japan underpins regional stability and the Indo-Pacific strategy. Our second objective is to advance American prosperity and deepen our economic partnerships. Third is to protect US citizens abroad. Fourth is to promote American values, assure Japanese support for US policy, and to advance American influence. And we do that with kind of two subcategories. First is to maintain Japanese support for our various US policy goals. And next, we'd like to reinvigorate the US-Japan people-to-people ties. Next slide, please. So how do we accomplish this? Well, we use a variety of sources, primarily State Department and other US government sources. And then we also produce original content. Next slide, please. So these are a couple of our flagship social media accounts. We have Secretary Blinken, the official State Department Twitter account, the State Department spokesperson, and then the deputy spokesperson of the State Department. A couple of things that we keep in mind are the tone, the style. Do we want to be more descriptive, less descriptive? We want to focus on what, we want to focus on why and not just what we are speaking about. And then we want to think about what types of content are we generally going to share or not share. And this also goes into the larger picture of what are our overall goals. Every single post you see from the US Embassy account has gone through some form of thought process. There's thought behind every post that we make. With regards to the Secretary's account, the social media voice of the Secretary drives the media narrative on policy priorities. So often we will retweet the Secretary because he is the voice of US foreign policy. Along these same lines, we can retweet the President of the United States and other high-level government officials. Additionally, we can retweet the State Department or amplify content posted by the State Department. Again, the US Embassy sits under the authority of the US Department of State. If there's a message that the State Department has put out, we can never go wrong by amplifying it. Then we have the State Department spokesperson, who is currently Ned Price. He has a Twitter account that we often amplify, much like retweeting the State Department or the Secretary of State. We can't go wrong by amplifying messages from the State Department spokesperson, as he is the voice of the State Department. And the same would go for the deputy spokesperson, who also speaks with authority with regards to US foreign policy as the deputy spokesperson of the State Department. Next slide, please. So here we have just a snapshot of the main Twitter accounts from the US Embassy. At the top, we have at US Embassy Tokyo. That is the official Twitter account. We also use that tag for our Facebook and Instagram. Next, we have at US Amb Japan, which is the official Twitter account of the United States ambassador to Japan. In this case, we have a chargé d'affaires, which is the person who represents the United States government when we do not have a named ambassador or ambassador in country. That is currently Raymond Green, who recently took up his post on July 17th. We have another account, which is at US Connect. The target audience for that is usually younger students. So you all would actually fall right into our target audience for that account. That's where we would amplify these types of events and our Education USA content. And these three accounts often amplify each other. Next, we have the US Visa Tokyo account. That account is managed by our consular section, as well as the ACS Tokyo account. The US Visa account primarily speaks to an audience of Japanese or other third country nationals with interests or visa needs related to the US Embassy. And then the ACS Tokyo account target audience would be US citizens primarily living in Japan. Because it has our largest reach, the at US Embassy Tokyo features a wide range of content. We tweet often, but our focus is always quality over quantity. These tweets are typically posted in English and Japanese because our audience tend to be bilingual, or if we have an audience that primarily speaks Japanese or reads Japanese, we want them to be able to engage with our content as well. We also publish press releases and link to other embassy website resources from this account. The chargé d'affaires or ambassador account tweets less often, but also has a general audience target. This account primarily highlights the chargé or ambassador's activities and will sometimes include statements on policy. In terms of social media, Twitter has likes and favorites and replies. So it is quite easy for us to see how and who is engaging with our content, not in terms of specific users, but we can get a feel for which audiences tend to engage with us on Twitter. Twitter also has wonderful analytics tools, and it can tell us more about how people are engaging with our content so that we can keep that in mind as we produce more content in the future. Some people say that social media is a battle for attention. The data that we can get from Twitter, also for Facebook, helps us adapt or improve our messaging to make sure we're accomplishing our goals. Right now, our US Embassy Tokyo account has 131.1 thousand followers. The ambassador's account has 40.8 thousand followers. And our US Connect account has 43.6 thousand followers. Next slide, please. So two other accounts that are managed out of the US Embassy in Tokyo are our Facebook, which you can see on the left, and our Instagram accounts. As you know, Instagram is owned by Facebook, so the accounts are connected. However, the audiences are almost polar opposites. Instagram's audience tends to be a bit younger, mostly teenagers to middle-aged adults. And Instagram is most of our soft content. We have an idiom series that we often post on this account to help our Japanese audience become more familiar with different sayings we have in the United States. We also highlight images related to US life and culture. We project that Instagram will eclipse Facebook in popularity in coming years, and some analytics data shows that this has already happened. Facebook tends to draw an older, more retiree type crowd. The content here focuses on US culture and society. We regularly amplify articles from our American View online journal, and that site translates articles from English to Japanese, but also features English language articles on a wide range of topics. We also post information about upcoming embassy events and embassy announcements on Facebook. Currently, our Facebook account has 107.2 thousand followers. Our Instagram account has 21.8 thousand followers. Next slide, please. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about our consulate and consulate general Twitter accounts. So the accounts I discussed before are managed and housed at the US Embassy. However, we have a larger mission Japan, which includes our 5 consulates. Yes, 5 consulates. Each of these consulates have their own social media accounts. And as I mentioned before, the way our US Embassy accounts will sometimes amplify one another, we always make an effort to amplify our consulates as well, because we are one mission and one team and are sharing the same message. And this also gives us an opportunity to amplify the events and happenings in the areas outside of Tokyo. For example, our consulate in Nagoya, the last principal officer had a very popular cat who regularly made appearances on that account. And the new principal officer also has cats. So if you enjoy fun cat content, our consulate in Nagoya is a great account to follow. The cats get into some very interesting activities. All of our consulates share interesting content about events happening in their areas of Japan. Again, the embassy amplifies that content often, and I would recommend that you actually follow all these accounts, whether or not you live in that area. It's a great way to get a bird's eye view of the different US embassy and consulate activities throughout Japan. In terms of follower counts, our consulate in Naha has 36.1 thousand followers. The consulate in Nagoya has 13.2 thousand followers. The consulate in Sapporo has almost 10,000 followers. The consulate in Fukuoka has 7.5 thousand followers. And the consulate in Osaka Kobe has 4.5 thousand followers. Next slide, please. One of the things I'd like to discuss next is called the ABC model. So when we create or amplify content, we keep the ABC model in mind. The first question we like to ask ourselves is, who is our audience? You want to ask yourself, the content I'm creating or seeking to amplify, is it of interest to the general public, or are we trying to reach a more niche audience? This gets tricky with social media because even when you're trying to reach a target audience, your message is typically available to a wider public, and so you need to keep that in mind. The next thing we look at is behavior. So you want to think about your goal when you're sharing a message. We never share content just to share it. It typically needs to fall into one of those objectives I mentioned earlier. Is it promoting people-to-people ties? Is it, I don't know, amplifying kind of things related to the US-Japan alliance? So anytime you see content on our social media, we try to keep one or more of those objectives in mind. So one recent example is the Olympics. President Biden's policy is that the United States affirmed support for the Tokyo Olympic Games moving forward, with all public health measures necessary to protect athletes, staff, and spectators. With that in mind, since the US government position was support for the Olympics, we regularly amplify Team USA content and post from the host towns throughout Japan. This content also promoted our goal of furthering people-to-people ties. Finally, we look at the content, which is C in the ABC model. After we've determined our audience and the behavior, we move to content. Sometimes there's someone on Twitter who has already said the message we want to share, and so we amplify. That can be reposting, retweeting, or quote tweeting. When an original message is in Twitter, which is in English, which is typically the case when we are tweeting US government sources, we often quote tweet that and provide a Japanese translation so that our audience, going back to A, is able to engage with that message. The example here on the screen is a recent post, I think this was from a couple of days ago, for our Tokyo 2020 silver medalists which was our USA softball team. If you remember, the Japanese national team actually won gold in this case. The US and Japan are friends, and so we had no qualms about tweeting about the Japanese team winning gold and the US team winning silver because we were both winners. For this image, I just used the Team USA image, but if you look at our account, we've actually been amplifying both Team USA and Team Japan content because our audience is interested in both, and it accomplishes the goal of acknowledging and appreciating our people-to-people ties and our overall alliance. Next slide, please. So here I have two examples of original content that has been produced by the embassy. The first is the farewell message from Charge d'Affaires Jo Young, who left Japan in June of this year. This was a quite popular video. I will give you all an opportunity to see it. The second video is an Anaba, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, video in which the former Charge and his daughter went to a local restaurant here in Tokyo and tried out some food that our audiences had recommended on Twitter. Yuki, if we can watch the first video, please.
皆様、こんにちは。駐日米国臨時代理大使のジョセフ・ヤングです。約2年の任期を終えて、まもなく日本を離れます。今世紀の最も重要な同盟である日米同盟を強化するために、私のチームと協力し、この日米両国の歴史上大切な時期に日本で勤務することができました。これは生涯の名誉となりました。日本で最も印象に残った出来事は何かとよく聞かれますが、これは本当に難しい質問です。私はこれまで日本中を旅するという大きな喜びを味わってきました。石垣島の青い海、北海道の純白の親切、そしてその間にあるあらゆる場所を目にしました。また名誉なことに、天皇陛下の即位の礼に出席させていただきました。2011年に東日本大震災と津波が発生した時、私は大使館に勤務しておりました。そして悲劇の瞬間が日米両国の友情を永遠に強固なものにするのを目の当たりにしました。壊滅的な震災から10周年を迎えた今年3月には陸前高田を訪れ、計り知れない損失と破壊に直面した日本人の回復意欲を目にしました。幸運にもこの10年間の大半の日本で勤務し、日本関連の業務に取り組んできましたが、まだ味わっていない極めて日本的な経験がいくつかありました。そこで大使館の広報文化交流部チームの協力を得て、やりたいことの短いリストを作って、日本での最後の数週間でできるだけ多くのことをしようと計画しました。まず初めて大相撲の本場所を観戦し、照ノ富士関に米国大統領杯を贈呈するという行為によくしました。次に3階建てのゴルフ練習場に行きました。私は最近ゴルフにハマっていて、何かストロークに物足りなさを感じていましたが、幸運にも素晴らしいゴルフの先生に出会えて、私のフォームを修正していただきました。どなたか私のスライスを直すためのアドバイスがありましたら、ぜひツイートしてください。妻と私は一緒に千代田区まで足を運び、本格的なそば打ちを体験しました。大いに楽しみましたが、妻が特に気に入ったのは下田産のわさびです。季節の和菓子をいただいた後は茶道を体験しました。伝統的な日本庭園を楽しみ、ゆったりした時間を満喫しました。そして最後に、私たちのリストの中で最も気に入ったのは、名高いお宮八幡宮で神父会の皆さんと弓道を体験したことです。またね、足らなくても素晴らしい体験でした。いつかまた日本に戻り、もっと冒険をし、さらに多くの友人を作ることを家族ともども楽しみにしています。大使館をさらにあたり、この数年間で日本とのパートナーシップがより強固になったことを大変誇りに思います。私たちの安全保障同盟、経済関係、そして人と人の絆が引き続き繁栄し、拡大していくことに疑問の余地はありません。両国をここまで導いてくださった日本と米国の皆様のご尽力に心から感謝いたします。これからもますます日米の絆が強くなりますように。ありがとうございました。またお会いする日まで。さようなら。
Thank you so much for sharing that, Yuki. So I have, I think, one slide left, but it's okay. It's just the last slide. So in that video, we took the ABC elements, looking at who our target audience was. In this case, the charge wanted to say sayonara to the Japanese people. He had spent, I believe, 4 years here in various positions at the embassy this last time. And he wanted to go through a checklist or a bucket list of items or things he'd enjoyed here or hadn't had a chance to try. He wanted to share that with the Japanese people. And then he also wanted to share a message. So we were very deliberate in how we structured the video. We wanted it to be fun and light, but as you see, we worked in his message over top. He talked about our policy objectives and the importance of the US-Japan relationship. However, we were able to work in those fun elements of him trying various aspects of Japanese culture and enjoying it. This video did very well with our audience, and I was able to see some of you all smiling as you watched it, which is what we hoped to accomplish, because we very much value our relationship with the Japanese people, and we find that video is a good way to connect with people, and our audiences tend to enjoy when we are enjoying Japanese experiences. So everyone wins when we make these types of videos. So that's just one of many examples of social media. There's another video there that I invite you all to watch later on YouTube. I want to wrap up now and thank you all for your time. As you can see, those are the social media handles for our embassy, ambassador, and consulate accounts. You're welcome to follow any or all of them. And I'm looking forward to answering your questions. Thank you.